So today we're going to dive into a pretty wild new idea in AI. The basic idea is that the digital worlds we build for our AI, they aren't just empty boxes. They're actually shaping and maybe even limiting their intelligence. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with a big question. What if the very fabric of the digital worlds we build for AI is actually holding them back? That is the central question behind a really fascinating paper on hyperbolic neural cellular automata. The authors are arguing that to build truly complex intelligence, we might need to completely change the laws of physics, so to speak, of the digital space itself.
Now, to get why that's such a big deal, we need to talk about the basics. See, most of the time, AI models are built in these simple digital universes called cellular automata. Just imagine a checkerboard where each little square, or cell, can just be on or off, right? Super simple. The state of each cell is decided by a few basic rules based on what its immediate neighbors are doing. The famous game of life is a perfect example of this.
Okay, sounds simple enough, but here's the catch. This simple, flat grid world, it has a huge hidden problem. When we try to represent the complexity of the real world in this flat space, we hit some major glitches that totally mess with the information we're trying to work with.
And right here, this is the heart of the problem. Think about it, a flat grid, like a piece of graph paper. It grows in a really predictable, kind of slow way. It's what we call polynomial growth. But the real world doesn't work like that. Think about a tree, or your family tree, or even the connections in your brain. They don't grow slowly. They branch out, they explode outwards. That's exponential growth. So you see, there's this massive mismatch between our flat digital worlds and the complex branching reality we want them to understand.
And that mismatch leads us to our first big roadblock, the geometric capacity bottleneck. Basically, when you try to cram all that complex, branching, exponential data onto a simple, flat grid, you have to distort it. The paper calls this over-squashing, and the best way to picture it is trying to flatten an orange peel. You just can't do it, right? You try to make it perfectly flat, and it tears and stretches, and you lose the whole point of its original shape.
All right, so that's problem number one. Problem number two is something called the temporal binding problem. Yeah, it sounds complicated, but think about your own brain for a second. You have all these different neurons firing in totally different spots, but somehow they all combine to form one single cohesive thought. How? Well, a big part of it is they're bound together by firing in sync at the same time. Well, in a standard cellular automaton, there's no built-in way to do that. There's no glue to link distant cells together in time. It's kind of like you have this huge orchestra, but every musician can only hear the person sitting right next to them. You're never going to get a symphony that way.
So, okay, we've got these two massive problems. How do we even begin to fix them? Well, the solution these researchers came up with is, honestly, it's both really elegant and kind of mind-bending. They realized that instead of just building a bigger, flatter grid, we need to change the very geometry of our digital universe.
And that is the key insight right there. It's like for years we've been trying to build these massive, complex skyscrapers on a foundation that was only ever meant for a little one-story house. The answer isn't a bigger building, it's a totally new kind of foundation.
So what is this new foundation? It's called hyperbolic space. Now, this is probably not something you covered in high school geometry. Unlike the flat space of a piece of paper, hyperbolic space has what's called negative curvature. Okay, the easiest, most intuitive way to picture this is to think of a Pringles chip. You know how it curves up in one direction but down in the other? That's the idea. And this weird, saddle-like shape has an absolutely incredible property.
And this is where it gets really powerful. As the paper puts it, in hyperbolic space, the volume available within a radius r grows exponentially. What that basically means is, in this kind of world, the amount of available space doesn't just grow, it explodes exponentially. The farther out you go from any point, the more and more room there is. It's the perfect setup for complex things to grow without bumping into each other.
And just like that, boom, problem number one is solved. This exponential growth in the space itself is a perfect match for the exponential growth of that complex tree-like data we were talking about before. You can finally flatten that orange peel without squashing or tearing it because the surface itself is literally expanding to make room for it.
Okay, so we fixed the space problem. Awesome. But what about that other issue, that temporal glue we need to bind everything together? For that, the researchers came up with another clever idea, something you can think of as a digital heartbeat.
The idea is called binding by synchrony, and honestly, the best analogy is a flash mob. Okay, so picture this. Step one, you've got all these individual cells, our dancers, right? And each one has its own little rhythm, its own little beat. Then, step two, they start listening to their neighbors, and they begin to adjust their own beat to try and match up.
And then, step 3, over time, whole groups of these cells, even ones that aren't right next to each other, they all start to lock into the same shared rhythm. They form a coherent, synchronized group. That's the temporal glue. It's a shared digital heartbeat.
All right, so now we've got our two key ingredients on the table. We've got a new kind of space that has all the room we need for complexity, and we've got a new kind of time, a shared rhythm that lets different parts of that space talk to each other. So, what happens when we put them together? Well, when you combine that exponentially expanding hyperbolic space with these synchronized pulsing cells, you get what the paper calls a hyperbolic neural cellular automaton, or H-NCA for short. And that is the whole shebang, the complete model.
I mean, it's a beautiful theory, right? It's so elegant. But the big question is always the same. Does it actually work? Is this just a cool idea on paper, or will this system really organize itself the way they think it will? So, to find out, they built a small toy model to test it. They kicked things off with all the cells just doing their own thing, totally random rhythms. So, as you can see, the overall synchronization level was basically 0. But then, they let it run. And after just 50 steps, look what happened. The system started to self-organize. The synchronization level shot way up, which shows that the cells were actually starting to pulse together in a coherent rhythm, all on their own.
So yeah, the toy model confirms it. The theory holds up. Even in this little test, the system did exactly what it was designed to do. The cells synced up by themselves, creating that digital heartbeat, and at the same time, this special hyperbolic geometry did its job, preserving the complex shape of the data without mashing it all up.
Okay, so we've got this powerful new framework that actually works. But what's the point? What could we actually do with it? Why does building an AI in a, let's be honest, Pringles-shaped universe really matter in the long run?
Well, the potential applications here are actually huge and really exciting. I mean, just imagine using this to create generative models of really complex natural systems. Think coral reefs or the way a rainforest grows. It's also a perfect fit for learning anything with a deep, branching structure, like human language or those massive knowledge graphs. Plus, it gives scientists a whole new sandbox to study the fundamentals of self-organization, and it might even help us model biological processes, like how the human brain wires itself up during development.
But of course, we've got to be realistic here, and the authors are very upfront about the limitations. For one, that amazing exponential growth in space, well, it also means an exponential growth in how much computer power you need. That's a massive hurdle. And remember, the proof of concept model was tiny, just 61 cells. It hasn't been tested on any real-world learning tasks yet. So what we have here is a brilliant theoretical foundation for sure, but it's very much a starting point, not some finished off-the-shelf product. But, as the authors point out in their conclusion, the real contribution here is something much deeper than any one application. They say, this framework provides theoretical foundations for understanding how geometric substrate shapes emergent computation. In other words, they've given us a new way to think about how the physical shape of a system's universe can actually dictate the kind of intelligence that can grow inside it.
So if you take away one thing from all this, let it be this. For decades, we've been obsessed with the algorithms, the software running on the machine. This research forces us to consider that the machine itself, the fundamental shape of the digital space, might be just as important, if not more so. The very shape of the universe we build our AI in could be the ultimate bottleneck, or the key that unlocks its true potential.
And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. If geometry really does shape computation, then what amazing problems are we going to solve when we finally stop thinking flat?